No love lost. Campaigners target the Scottish Government over plans to legalise same-sex marriage. Opposing sides in the heated debate are here in the studio. And a different kind of Murdoch. Rupert's TV executive daughter sets out her stall. We're not going away. The message today to the Scottish Government from protesters campaigning against same-sex marriage. Members of the Scottish Cabinet were booed by a group of around 200 people outside a public meeting in Renfrew. Afterwards, the First Minister reaffirmed his personal support for a change in the law. Here's STV's chief reporter, David Cowan.
Don't ignore us.
The Scottish Government has acknowledged that legalising same-sex marriage is opposed by many people. Today they came face to face with around 200 of them who'd gathered under the banner of Scotland for Marriage.
It's only you that think this is right. Only you that think this is right.
But I absolutely
Don't ignore us. We're not going to go away.
Senior government ministers stopped and listened mostly. Brief encounters which failed to win over the crowd.
I don't think it's scriptural. According to the God's word, it's not on. It shouldn't be.
I don't want my children coming home with books that compromises what I believe as a Christian the Bible teaches quite clearly.
It could bring in situations where people have to totally go against their conscience, especially in things like teaching.
The First Minister avoided the protesters by using a side door. Aides said he'd been running late and didn't have time to stop. The meeting was a chance for the Scottish public to grill the Cabinet. The second question was on same-sex marriage from a group called Operation Great Britain.
Where does your mandate come from doing what is not right but is obviously wrong?
Mr Salmond said MSPs will get a free vote and everything possible will be done to entrench the rights of those who oppose what his government is doing.
I personally find it difficult to see whose freedoms are being impinged by the move towards this legislation. I don't feel, for example, that my marriage will be diminished in any way if single-sex marriage is introduced.
Afterwards, the First Minister and his deputy met representatives of Scotland for Marriage. They urged the government to include legal protection for those who continue to oppose same-sex marriage after it becomes law. Earlier today, the First Minister had visited an engineering firm in Renfrew. Scotland for Marriage is vowing to step up its campaign. The sparks will fly for some time yet.
We're now joined by the Scotland for Marriage spokesman, Peter Kearney, who's also media director of the Catholic Church in Scotland, and Tom French, who's policy coordinator for the Equality Network. Thank you both for joining us this evening. Peter, you were at the protest today and you met with Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond. How productive was the meeting from your point of view?
It was useful on a couple of grounds. First of all, it made it clear, I think, to the Scottish Cabinet, to the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister, that the will on the part of people who campaign to support marriage is very strong. And as you said to begin with, this issue is not going to go away. We wanted to focus, when we discussed the issue with the Minister, the First Minister and the Deputy First Minister, the question of legal protection and reassurances, because really what the Scottish Government have promised to do is two things. One, enact same-sex marriage, and two, make sure there are protections for people's conscience.
But do you really think protests like this can change people's minds because the vast majority of MSPs from every party back same-sex marriage?
Well, what's clear from the statements from the government and from the points we made today is that the decision on this won't be in the hands of MSPs. In order to deliver the protections that they have promised, the Scottish Government will have to change Westminster, in other words, reserved UK law. MSPs can have no part or no say in that. So they really are in the hands of the Westminster Government, asking them to make legislative changes to protect people in Scotland. Whether or not that can be done remains to be seen. We have many, many doubts about that.
Tom French, the Scottish Government consultation had 78,000 responses. 2/3 of them were against same-sex marriage. What's the point of having a consultation if the Scottish Government's going to ignore it?
Well, actually, 65% of the Scottish consultation responses were in favour of same-sex marriage and only 35% were against. The Scottish Government were very clear at the beginning of the process that postcard petitions, which made up the other numbers, would not be counted.
They're still people's views, though, Tom.
But the point of a consultation is to hear the range of arguments. It's not supposed to be a representative sample of what the Scottish population think. If you want that, then you have to look at the opinion polls, and the opinion polls have consistently shown over the months and years that a 2/3 majority of Scots support same-sex marriage.
The protest today was about certain textbooks that would be used to explain about same-sex marriage in school. You said we mustn't censor LGBT people in schools, but what about the teachers' beliefs and their freedom of conscience?
I think it's absolutely right that in religious instruction, teachers are able to explain the range of views that religious groups have on issues like marriage, divorce, creationism and so on. But equally, we don't want to see any LGBT young people discriminated against at school. You know, school's supposed to be a welcoming environment, and teachers have a duty of care to young people, regardless of their sexual orientation. And so, of course, we don't want to see LGBT people and same-sex relationships somehow censored from the school curriculum.
You don't want to see people censored, Peter?
But local authorities also have a duty of care towards their employees, in other words, the teachers, and it would be wrong if an authority was to compel a teacher to act against their conscience. Now, sadly, we have seen a situation in London where a teacher who was told to use a same-sex storybook in a class of primary children and said they weren't comfortable using it and they didn't want to, lost their job. Now, what we said to the First Minister and the Deputy today was, we want to look at situations like that. What happens to the teacher who says, and this is not a religious argument, you don't need to be religious to feel like this, I'm not comfortable with this material, I don't want to use it. Will their employer say, all right, and respect their conscience, or will they be sacked? What happens to the foster carers who say, we want to keep fostering kids, but we don't really believe marriage should have changed? Will they still be allowed to do that, or will they be sacked?
Will they still be allowed to do that, Tom?
I think the problem is here that we're going back to the same arguments that we heard over the debate around Section 28. And
they're important arguments, Tom. That's why we keep having to go back to them.
But the fact is that the education system is not changing as a result of legalising same-sex marriage. There's going to be no change to what schools can teach.
Well, the definition of marriage will change. And when a teacher says to the class, I believe marriage is between a man and a woman, in law, they'll now be contradicting the law. Will they still be allowed to say that? Or will they be forced to conform to the new orthodoxy?
Well, I think teachers will have to respect that there will be young people who will have a variety of sexual orientations, a variety of different backgrounds. Some will have parents of the same sex. And of course, it's right that schools should not be discriminating against LGBT people.
That's why many people do feel afraid that what that really means is teachers will toe the line or lose their job.
Is that not inevitable, Tom, that because the definition of marriage is going to change, that therefore will change the teaching?
Well, I think the problem there, though, is that teachers aren't in schools to share their own opinions, whether it's their views on which political party they support, which religious denomination they might belong to, or any other issue. Teachers are there to, present the curriculum, to put forward the range of views of different religions in religious instruction, for example.
Peter, just moving on from that, last time you came on the programme, you made claims that a homosexual lifestyle resulted in premature death. There is absolutely no evidence to support those claims.
There's more than enough evidence to support those claims.
What evidence is that?
Well, in the reply I gave to someone who asked me about this, I quoted an LGBT campaign group in Canada who took the Canadian government to the European rights, their Human Rights Commission, on one of their arguments was that gay and lesbian and transgender people have a lower life expectancy.
But the two bits of research that have been mentioned before, the researchers involved, they said they did not condone the use of the research in this manner as it restricts the political or human rights of gay and bisexual men. And one group went on further and said that death is a product of the way a person lives. It cannot be attributed solely to their sexual orientation.
That's absolutely true. It cannot. It's entirely down to the way they live, of course. And
but
as
you
a
just
result
contradicted
of that,
what you've said there.
My point from the beginning was absolutely clear. If you are living a same-sex lifestyle, in other words, if you're engaged in practices, same-sex practices, you open yourself up to many risks. Having a same-sex orientation doesn't do that, but
Tom.
acting on it does. And just on the question of the Canadian study, the researchers did say they weren't happy with how it's used, but unfortunately they supplied the facts.
But it has been discredited, your use of it, though, from him. But Tom, come.
I think what this shows is that for Scotland for Marriage and for the Catholic Church, this isn't just about protecting individual religious groups' right to, uphold marriage in the way they see fit. Of course, the Catholic Church will continue to be able to just celebrate marriage between a man and a woman. But what this shows is that actually you're opposed to same-sex relationships full stop, and that you want to see that agenda, that anti-gay agenda, spread through our schools
ultimately
and spread through society.
The protection should be from people who feel same-sex attraction, and at the moment, the only message they get from society is go ahead and act on it. But there's no suggestion that there's harm or risk or danger involved, and there should be.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us in Scotland Tonight.